about technocracy in his Between Two Ages book that he wrote in 1970. You would then have, as Brandon was picking up, the religious element in this, because if you look at what Orwell had said about coming to love Big Brother, if you were to take away people's, say, computer, cell phones, and credit cards, and they don't do that, I love my computer, cell phone, and credit card, right? So there's this dependency. And so what will happen, I think, in the future is all those three things will be combined. You'll have a little larger than a cell phone, and you'll do all your buying and selling, right? Biblically, you buy and sell everything. And you will have a unique identifying number, and you'll hold it in your hand. See the number in your hand? So there are biblical aspects to this. And like Brandon was saying about the Pope previously actually gave Robert Mueller a gold cross. So there's that connection. As Robert Mueller was Assistant Secretary General, the Secretary Generals came and went all the time. And he set up his own schools. And my mother actually got the curriculum from them. And right there in the front, it says Robert Mueller schools, which are like 40 of them all over the country, headquartered, I think, in Arlington, Texas, are based on the underlying teachings of Alice Bailey. So you have all of these things linked together.
Absolutely, the bringing up of Alice Bailey. And then, of course, you have the International Baccalaureate, the IB education curriculum, which the UN has helped fund, which is now in thousands of schools around the world, many in the United States of America, which teach the UN Charter, and then Common Core, which, of course, is the same program that's been since George H. introduced it, Papa Bush introduced it, which then Clinton grabbed it, changed the name, and then George W. changed the name, and then Obama changes the name. All goes back to the UN. Again, all under Robert Mueller. So it's education, it's economics, it's environmentalism, it's ecumenicalism. The one thing I would make sure the audience understands is when we talk about science, we're talking about human science or behavioral psychology science. This is a word, science. We have to differentiate between operational science, the known laws of thermodynamics and such, and what we're calling science is behavioral psychology sciences, Darwinian evolution science, spiritual evolution. I just make sure the audience understands that is totally different than operational science that put a man on the moon or lifts a rocket. This is a difference between operational science and a humanistic Darwinian Freud, quote, science.
I guess the thing that I'm thinking is we've covered all of this terrain and you're looking at it. I recently heard someone try to explain to a men's group what technocracy is all about. As a matter of fact, it was after you'd spoken in our area recently, Pat Wood. But when he got done, he failed to make the connection of, well, what is this looking like? And everyone sort of goes, well, that's sort of nice to know. Why should I be concerned about all of this? So why the concern?
Well, the future of our world and of our country right now hangs in the balance as to who's going to win this battle for worldview or world paradigm, if you will. The United Nations has declared openly this year that it intends to kill capitalism and replace it with their so-called green economy, the green economic system, which historically speaking is pure unadulterated technocracy from the 1930s. It's a resource-based economic system. It's completely otherworldly to our current way of life. Now, that's pretty doggone important. You talk about businesses, you talk about people's paychecks, you talk about jobs, you talk about opportunity, you talk about education. All of these things are the only things we know. It's the only things we've ever known. And right now, basically, they're all up for grabs on the world stage, and the United Nations is pushing like never before to throw capitalism out the door and to implement this brand new utopian system that's never, ever been tried in the history of the world. They even admit that it's never been tried in the history of the world, and they expect us to follow them, believing that, well, certainly capitalism is killing us, so I guess we might as well just try something new, and we'll trust you and follow you like the Pied Piper leading the rats off into destruction. I think that's the stakes of the whole system right now. It's critically important that people understand the future is about to be radically altered if left in the hands of these well, I call them crazy people, but if left in the hands and minds of these people that are running organizations like the United Nations, it's just crazy.
Pat Wood, one of our panelists here today on the program, author of the book Technocracy Rising, the name of his website as well, technocracyrising.com. Our other guests, Brandon House and Dr. Dennis Cuddy. We'll be back with our annual checkup on the world of globalism. I'm John Lufter. We're at steelonsteel.com. Like us on Facebook. The program is Steel on Steel. There was an article recently that some psychiatrist or psychologist had done a study on the types of people that believe in conspiracy theories. Now, I always like that because conspiracy theory implies that A, nothing is going on, B, it's something you hallucinated up or something like that. And they don't distinguish that from really ongoing agendas. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Luffer here with you. There's a long train of people who have written material on their goals for some kind of a global government and that they collaborate with other people. Marilyn Ferguson wrote a book in the 1980s. I still got a copy sitting here called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And she's talking about this whole new global movement and that it's not really a conspiracy in under a single light bulb, people conspiring in secret to do this type of thing, but rather it's pretty open, saying it's pretty much out on the table. It's open. We're just finding like-minded people who want to network, that was her term, network together, and promote this whole idea of a new universal form of order. And that's what you're hearing now. If you listen, you'll hear them all talking about a new order. Even the Pope's advisor, Schellenhuber, who is a leading environmentalist and global warming promoter in Germany, talks about his ideas for a global government, a global court, a global economic system, these things. So then if they mean that, what is this going to look like? Is this just rabid conspiracy theory? But then if it is a conspiracy theory, which always implies that you don't know what you're talking about. It's something you dreamed up. It's a fantasy and it would never really happen. But you have to ask, well, what is it they're talking about? And are they working towards this? And if so, then what will it look like? And I always thought that we were moving towards something that I call GPS. It was easy to remember. Global pantheistic socialism. It would have a socialistic form of international order, although I'm beginning to think it's looking a little more fascistic, a relationship between big business and big international government, and everyone else will be forced to toe the line. And it will be global and pantheism because it will have a wide dollop, as we've already discussed here on the program, of a pantheistic ideology buried inside of it. Our panelists today, Pat Wood, Dennis Cuddy, and Brannon House. As I mentioned, I thought this was all going to be some kind of a socialistic global government. I felt it was moving in that direction. Is this something different, however?
Technocracy is different. It has a lot of things in common with socialism, communism, Marxism, fascism. You can find commonalities with all of them, but technocracy is radically different than those and was never defined historically as being one of those. In fact, if you wanted to get a good fist fight going, if you could find a real hardcore technocrat in the 1930s and call him a communist, he'd put his dukes up right now and say, I'm not a communist, don't you dare call me a communist. And they would argue forcefully that they're not communists because a resource-based economic system is altogether different than a price-based economic system. That's the main thing. And secondly is, who's going to control it? The communists said the government's going to control things. Technocracy says the scientists and engineers are going to control everything. And you don't need the people even involved in it. Science will do it for you. And so science is going to be the arbiter of what gets produced, where it gets distributed, and who gets to consume what. This is not part and parcel of any capitalistic system that's ever existed in the history of the world. It's brand new, and it's based on technology.
And that would include, say, for example, our healthcare system, right? Who's going to get treated, who won't. They'll be made on some sort of a pseudo-scientific basis. So now you have science intruding into the area of morality.
Yeah, I think what Pat may be describing, I would refer to as communitarianism. And that's where I see this one world system going toward, as a communitarian system, or Henry Lamb used to call communism light. It's the mixture of socialism with capitalism, also called the third way. And whether it's Tony Blair or the Clintons or Rick Warren with his three-legged stool or Peter Drucker, that's that communitarianism, big government, big business, corporate fascism. I think that's very similar to what I hear Pat describing.
And then the next question would be, okay, the problem as I see it is you have almost all your main politicians in the West on board with this stuff. So when you talk about stopping it, there's a huge amount of momentum here. There's financial momentum, political momentum. And most of the average people, we're down squabbling over here about who has rights and who doesn't have rights, et cetera, et cetera. Those seem almost sidebar arguments in the midst of the whole trend.
Well, let me just go back, if I can, real quick on why does it matter? Because you asked that to Pat, and I would say it matters because I get this too. People after a radio show will post on Facebook, what's it matter? when we're talking about the things we're about now? Well, obviously it matters to God because Revelation chapter 1, verse 3 says, and it's the only book in the Bible that states that there's a special blessing that comes on those who seek to understand it and to teach it and to live by the ordinances they're contained in. So it's obviously important to God. He gives a special blessing to someone who seeks to understand that very complicated book of Revelation, which is tied back to Daniel and other books in the Bible. So it's important because it's important to God. It's also important because in the book of Revelation, we see that the true followers of God have nothing to do with it. That Babylonian one world government system, they're not having to do with it. We see that repeated in 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 17. Don't be involved in these spiritual enterprises or endeavors with unbelievers, those who hate God. And if you do these things, Christian, it says to the believer, I will not bless you. I will not welcome you. I will not have favor on you. So it's important that we understand what is it that is hostile to the ordinances of God, have nothing to do with them. What is it that's hostile to the truth of God, to his church, and that we might be like Paul in Acts 20, 28 to 31, and guard the church from men who have risen from within. And if you don't understand what the philosophies and the ideas and the worldviews are, then you're not going to know where to avoid being a part of them. Now, the key, of course, is to know the truth. If you know the truth, then you'll begin to recognize the lie. But you also must understand what the philosophies of the day are because they're being packaged in Christian terminologies. And that is Satan's big ploy, to use enough truth to draw a crowd and then to rip the rug right out underneath from the people, meaning use enough truth to gain a crowd and then undermine the gospel. So you have to know biblical truth, but you also need to know about the philosophies of men, Colossians 2, 8, 9, so you're not cheated by them because they're going to increasingly be wrapped in Christian terminology. And most people don't understand. That's the false religions of the world. That's the cults. That's the New Age. They always use our terms: Jesus, Trinity, divinity, atonement, heaven, hell. They use all our terms. They hijack our terms, wrap them in Christianese, their false religion. And so if you don't know biblical truth, first and foremost, if you don't know something about the worldviews that are competing and the philosophies that are competing, then you won't recognize the lie when it's thrown up to you. And that's why it matters. You'll be a part of building this religious Reich, which the Bible says don't have any part of this.
Evangelicals, you see, are moving through this.
Well, the evangelicals are so on board. I often see my radio show, lest you think I'm picking on the Catholics, let me tell you about the Protestants now. And whether it's Rick Warren and his three-legged stool of Peter Drucker, communitarianism, whether it's the Southern Baptist Convention with Russell Moore, the head of their Liberty Commission, running around saying one social justice, creation care speech after another, whether it's the Nazarene would put out their own creation care document. All of these Protestant denominations have creation care documents that is nothing more than sustainable development. So no, it's not just the Pope. It's not just the Vatican. The Southern Baptist Vatican in Nashville is pushing this. The Vatican of whatever your denomination is pushing this. The Protestants are in as thick into this as the Vatican. And the one world religion will not be made up of one religion. All the world's religions coming together, whether it's the Vatican, whether it's the evangelicals, the Protestants, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the New Agers, it'll be an apostate Christianity, but they will unite with their shared common lie of man's divinity. Man is divine, all is God, God is all, Mother Earth, Gaia worship, which you can trace all the way back to Genesis 10 and 11, the Tower of Babel, a Babylonian religion, Queen of Babylon, mother-son cult. It all starts in Genesis 10 with Nimrod, and where it's all going back to a literal Babylon, Revelation 17 and 18, Babylon being mentioned more than any city in the Bible next to Jerusalem.
Okay.
And it's all wrapped in these four E's.
Dennis, you've traced this for a long time. I mean, going back to the beginning of the 20th century and slightly before that. That was a few years after you were born.
Yeah, just a few. Yeah, yeah, it does. Semiramis was a Babylonian goddess. She has different forms. And if you look at the depiction of her, I put it in one of my news reviews columns, the actual picture of what she looked like. It's exactly like the Statue of Liberty. And so you have these replications, and people look at them and say, oh, isn't that nice? They really don't understand symbolism of all of this stuff. And like Pat and Brandon was saying, all of these elements are there, and they're coming together, and they're planned that way. And like all these people are power lead, and they mimic the Bible. Sometimes, they'll take the Ten Commandments, and then they'll have the Earth Charter, and they'll put it in the Ark of Hope, designed like the Ark of the Covenant. And Gorbachev and Maurice Strong, who Stephen Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller's son, wrote it for them, says it's going to be like a new Ten Commandments.